Hello. My wife lost weight, started going to the gym, and her behavior changed. When I discovered she was cheating, my mom shockingly defended her actions. But one evening, everything shifted in a way I hadn't expected. I walked through the door after a long day at work, and right away, I knew something was off. Jessica was sitting on the floor, surrounded by a mess of clothes, shirts, jeans, dresses, all thrown out of her closet in a heap. She was crying so hard she could barely catch her breath. My heart dropped seeing her like that. I rushed over, knelt beside her, and gently asked what was wrong. At first, she didn't say anything, just pointed to the pile of clothes with this defeated look on her face. Finally, through her tears, she admitted that none of her clothes fit her anymore. She said she didn't even recognize the woman staring back at her in the mirror. Hearing her say that broke my heart. I hugged her tightly, trying to calm her down, and told her over and over how much I loved her. I reminded her she was still the incredible, beautiful woman I married. I thought maybe suggesting we go shopping together would cheer her up, get her some new clothes that fit comfortably and made her feel confident again. But as soon as the words left my mouth, I could see I'd said the wrong thing. Her tears came harder, and her voice cracked as she told me I didn't understand. She said buying bigger clothes felt like admitting she had failed, like she was giving up on herself. The weight gain wasn't just about numbers on a scale or clothes that didn't fit anymore, it was deeper than that. It was about how she felt trapped in a version of herself she no longer recognized. In that moment, I realized this was bigger than just finding her new outfits. Jessica was struggling with how she saw herself, and it ran much deeper than I'd understood. I sat with her, holding her hand and promising her that we'd work through this together, step by step. I wasn't going anywhere, and I wanted her to know that she didn't have to face this alone. Over the past 10 or 11 months, Jessica and I completely revamped our way of living. It wasn't easy at first, especially for her. Adjusting to an entirely new routine, waking up early with me and squeezing in time to exercise when she wasn't used to it, was a challenge. But, bit by bit, things started falling into place. Week by week, I saw her finding her groove, and I was blown away by how determined she was. As Jessica became more active and made healthier choices at meals, I noticed her confidence slowly starting to return. Then, about 2 months ago, she took a leap and joined a gym to start strength training. I couldn't go with her because of my long hours at work, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that she made the decision on her own, and I was incredibly proud of her. Watching her grow stronger, healthier, and genuinely happier was one of the best feelings. She blossomed into someone more outgoing and self-assured, which was amazing to see. Jessica began going out more often, making new friends at the gym, and even experimenting with different looks, changing up her style and appearance. In so many ways, she was evolving into the best version of herself, and I couldn't have been prouder of the woman she was becoming. When I got promoted at work, I thought it was the perfect moment to celebrate, not just for me, but for us. The promotion brought financial stability, and I felt excited about what it meant for our future. So, I planned a special night out for us, hoping it would be a memorable way to share my excitement and look ahead. During dinner, I brought up a topic that had always been part of our long-term plans: starting a family. With this new chapter of stability and growth, I felt it was the right time. I told Jessica that, financially, we were in the best position we'd ever been, and I thought it was the perfect opportunity to finally take the step toward parenthood. I figured she'd be thrilled, especially since we had talked about having kids so many times before, and she'd always said how much she wanted to be a mom. But as soon as I mentioned it, I noticed a change in her expression. She got quiet, not the excited, happy reaction I was expecting. At first, I didn't think much of it, so I kept going. I told her how this promotion could allow me to cut back on my hours once she got pregnant so I could be more present to help her out and be there for our future child. I was completely ready to be a hands-on husband and dad, but instead of lighting up with excitement, Jessica's mood grew even more subdued. Eventually, I asked her what was wrong. That's when she looked at me with this conflicted expression and told me she wasn't sure she wanted to have kids anymore. I was stunned. I hadn't seen this coming at all. She said she didn't think it was the right time and felt we should enjoy our freedom and youth for a few more years. When I pressed her gently, asking what had changed or why she suddenly felt this way, she didn't want to go into detail. I won't lie, it stung a bit. I'd been so excited about this next step, and hearing her hesitation caught me off guard. Still, I wanted to respect her feelings, so I told her we could put the idea on hold for now and revisit the conversation down the road. I didn't want to push her, so I tried to shift the focus back to enjoying the rest of our evening. Looking back now, I realize I should have encouraged her to open up more about what was on her mind. At the time, I thought giving her space was the right move, but I see now that it may have been the first sign of something deeper going wrong in our relationship. Over the following weeks, things between us began to change. It wasn't a sudden shift, it happened gradually, little by little. Jessica started to grow distant. For example, she stopped joining me for dinner every night, which had always been something we did together. Instead, she'd eat earlier in the evening and then spend most of her nights in bed, either glued to her phone or watching TV alone. Our Friday date nights, which we'd always prioritized, became less frequent. When I tried to reschedule and make plans with her, she'd tell me she already had plans with her new gym friends and didn't want to cancel on them. I knew how important her new social life was and wanted to support her, but it still hurt to feel like I was being pushed aside. Then one night, things took a turn for the worse. Jessica had gone out with her friends as usual, and I expected her home before 11, like always. If she was ever running late, she'd text me to let me know. But that night, the clock ticked past 11, then 11:30, and there was no message from her. I tried calling her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. By midnight, I couldn't relax. I stayed up, waiting to hear the sound of the door unlocking or my phone buzzing with a callback. Finally, around 1:30 in the morning, the doorbell rang. I practically leapt out of bed and rushed downstairs. When I opened the door, my heart sank. There was Jessica, leaning heavily on some guy for support. She smelled like she'd been drinking way too much, and she could barely stand on her own. The man was holding her up, steadying her as she swayed on her feet. The scene completely floored me. I didn't know what to think or feel. When I opened the door that night, there were a handful of people standing around Jessica. They looked concerned, and I quickly realized they were the friends she'd been hanging out with lately. The guy who had been helping her walk gently lowered her onto the sofa, where she immediately passed out. My mind was racing as I looked at my wife, limp and completely out of it. I turned to the group, trying to mask my unease, and asked what had happened. One of the girls stepped forward, looking a bit nervous. She explained it had been her birthday, and they'd partied a little too hard. Jessica, she said, had just had a bit more to drink than she could handle. Hearing that threw me off. Jessica never drank more than a glass of wine with me, and even then, it was rare. Seeing her like this was jarring. The girl continued to reassure me, saying there was nothing to worry about. They'd taken care of her, brought her home safely, and even handed over her phone and handbag. I appreciated the gesture, but I couldn't shake how unsettling it was to see Jessica in such a state. I glanced at the group, studying them for a moment. They all looked noticeably younger than Jessica and me, early 20s, maybe. I asked if that was the case, and they nodded. One of the guys, who introduced himself as Mark, explained that they all knew Jessica from the gym and had become good friends. I forced a polite smile, thanked them for bringing her home, and saw them out the door. After they left, I stood in the quiet living room, staring at my wife passed out on the couch. The unease I felt earlier deepened. This wasn't the Jessica I knew. I had so many questions swirling in my head. The next morning, I decided to bring it up gently. Over coffee, I asked her what had happened the night before and how she'd ended up in such a state. But instead of showing any concern or embarrassment, Jessica just laughed it off. She said she'd had a little too much fun with her friends, blamed herself for not handling her drinks, and assured me it wouldn't happen again. Still, I pressed her, carefully. I asked if there was any chance someone might have spiked her drink or taken advantage of her when she wasn't fully aware. But Jessica just rolled her eyes and told me I was overthinking it. She insisted everything was fine and that her friends would never do anything like that. It was all her fault, she said, for going overboard. I shifted gears slightly and asked her why she had been drinking so much in the first place. Her expression changed, less defensive, more irritated. She admitted she'd been drinking to fit in with her younger friends. Apparently, it was just what people do when they hang out. She confessed she usually kept it to 3 or 4 shots and had been brushing her teeth before coming home so I wouldn't notice the smell of alcohol. That admission hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the drinking, it was the fact that she had been hiding it from me. What else, I wondered, had she been keeping secret? I asked if this was why she never wanted me to meet her friends. Maybe she thought I'd judge her or feel out of place. But instead of opening up, Jessica snapped. She told me it wasn't mandatory for me to meet her friends and accused me of blowing things out of proportion. She admitted she couldn't connect with people her age at the gym, but this younger group had been welcoming, and she liked hanging out with them. I wasn't trying to accuse her of anything. I calmly reassured her that I didn't have an issue with her making new friends or even spending time with them. I just wished she'd been honest about it sooner. But that conversation didn't seem to bring us closer. After that, Jessica's behavior started changing even more. Now that she'd admitted to going out drinking, she didn't bother hiding it anymore. She started wearing much more revealing outfits, short skirts, plunging tops, and sky-high heels whenever she went out. It wasn't just the clothes that bothered me. It was the fact that she'd come home later and later, always drunk, slurring her words, barely able to walk straight. This wasn't the woman I married. At home, she became less involved. She stopped cooking meals, something she used to love doing for the two of us. Groceries would run out because she'd forget to go shopping, and I was left juggling long hours at work with trying to keep the house in order. It was exhausting, and no matter how much I tried to talk to her about it, Jessica seemed oblivious or uninterested in how her actions were affecting me. Finally, I confided in my closest friend. I laid it all out, the late-night drinking, the neglected home, the growing distance between us. I wasn't sure what I expected, maybe some reassurance that things would work out. Instead, he gave me a reality check I wasn't ready for. "These are red flags, man," he said bluntly. "You're overlooking them because you want to believe the best about her. But think about it. She's hiding things from you, going out all the time, and acting like a completely different person. You ever consider the possibility that she's cheating on you?" The words hit me like a truck. Cheating? I shook my head, immediately wanting to deny it. Jessica would never do that. But the more I thought about it, the more the doubts crept in. What if I had been looking at things through rose-colored glasses this whole time? That conversation with my friend hit me like a freight train. The idea that Jessica might be cheating on me had never seriously crossed my mind, not until he said it out loud. After that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Her strange behavior, the late nights, the secrecy, it all started to connect in ways I didn't want to believe. From that moment on, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in my gut. I began watching her more closely, paying attention to the little things I'd brushed off before. One thing stood out immediately: how glued she was to her phone. She was always texting, scrolling, or laughing at something, but it wasn't just that. It was how she did it. If I walked into the room, she'd tilt the screen away or quickly switch apps. It made me suspicious in a way I couldn't shake. I knew if I wanted answers, I'd have to see what was on that phone. That night, Jessica came home drunk again and collapsed onto the bed, snoring like she always did after one of her nights out. I waited until I was sure she was out cold, then quietly slipped out of bed and grabbed her phone from her bag. My hands were shaking as I crept into the living room, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. It felt wrong to invade her privacy, but at the same time, I needed to know the truth. The first obstacle was getting into the phone. She'd recently changed her password, and I didn't know it. For a moment, I panicked, but then I remembered Jessica wasn't exactly the most creative with passwords. I started trying the obvious ones: our anniversary, my birthday, her favorite numbers. None of them worked. Then I remembered her mom's birthday. Jessica had always been close to her mom, and I figured it might be something she'd use. I held my breath as I typed it in. The phone unlocked. I wasn't sure if I felt relief or dread as I opened her messages. I scrolled through them, bracing for the worst. At first, everything seemed normal, just casual conversations with friends from the gym, including Mark, the guy who'd helped her home that night. But the deeper I dug, the more my stomach sank. There they were, texts between Jessica and Mark that were far from innocent. They started out flirtatious, then crossed the line into something unmistakably intimate. And then there were the pictures that left no doubt in my mind that my wife had been having an affair. The messages dated back weeks, maybe even months. One of their most recent exchanges stopped me cold. They were planning to skip the gym the next day and meet up at a motel for what they called their usual fun time. My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest. I sat there in the dim light of the living room, staring at the screen, barely able to breathe. Jessica hadn't just lied to me, she had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I took screenshots of everything. I didn't know what I'd do with them yet, but I wanted to have evidence in case I needed it later. I felt disgusted, heartbroken, and furious all at once. But I also knew I couldn't just rely on texts. I needed to confront her with undeniable proof. The next day, I left work early, knowing exactly where Jessica and Mark would be. I drove to the motel they'd mentioned in their texts, parking a safe distance away so I wouldn't be seen. Sure enough, not long after, they pulled up in separate cars. They were laughing, completely at ease, like they didn't have a care in the world. I watched as they went inside, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I stayed parked there for what felt like an eternity, rage building with every passing minute. When they finally emerged, my stomach turned. Jessica's hair was messy, and she had the smug, carefree look on her face that made my blood boil. I couldn't hold back anymore. I got out of my car, phone in hand, and started recording as I walked toward them. Jessica's smile disappeared the moment she saw me. She froze, her face going pale, while Mark stood there looking like a deer caught in headlights. I let loose. Years of love, trust, and hope came crashing down in a wave of anger. I shouted things I don't even remember, calling them out for their betrayal. Mark barely said a word, probably too scared to even look at me. Jessica, on the other hand, started crying, chasing after me as I walked back to my car. I turned to her one last time and told her, "You can have him. I'm done with you." Then I got in my car and drove off, leaving her standing there in tears. When I got home, I didn't waste any time. I packed a bag with some clothes and essentials, grabbed my laptop, and left. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to get away. I ended up at a nearby hotel, where I sat alone, staring at the walls, trying to process everything. Fueled by anger and a little too much whiskey, I made a decision I probably shouldn't have. I posted the video I'd taken of Jessica and Mark on Facebook, along with a caption explaining what had happened. I wanted the world to know the truth. No way was I going to let her play the victim. The next morning, I woke up to a storm of notifications. My phone was blowing up with texts and missed calls from friends, family, and, of course, Jessica. Feeling overwhelmed, I decided to call my parents first. When I got my dad on the phone, his voice was calm but heavy with disbelief. "I can't believe she'd do this to you," he said. "But listen, son, whatever you decide to do, we're here for you." Hearing that brought a small sense of comfort, even if my world felt like it was crumbling around me. Hearing my dad's unwavering support gave me a sense of comfort I desperately needed. But when I called my mom, her response took me by surprise. She acknowledged my pain and frustration but urged me to think things through with a clear head. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She kept emphasizing that Jessica was my wife and that family was family, no matter what. I pushed back hard, telling her that Jessica had cheated on me and no longer deserved to be called my family. But Mom kept insisting that marriages aren't always black and white, that sometimes mistakes happen. "Accident?" I asked, my voice rising. "What do you mean by accident?" Her response was vague and unsettling. She said something about how people can't always stay loyal in long-term marriages and that sometimes people slip up. My stomach twisted at her words. It felt off, almost personal. I pressed her harder. "Mom, are you saying you've cheated on Dad?" There was a long, tense silence. She didn't deny it, but she didn't admit it either. Instead, she changed the subject. I hung up the phone feeling more confused and hurt than ever. The thought gnawed at me for days. Why would my mom, who'd always been fiercely protective of me, suddenly defend someone like Jessica? It didn't sit right. I began to wonder if she was projecting, if she was pushing me to forgive Jessica because of something in her own past. At first, I thought maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe I was just raw from the betrayal and seeing things that weren't there. But the more I dwelled on her cryptic words, the more the doubts consumed me. What if she was hiding something? As the days passed, I couldn't shake the nagging suspicion. For the first time in my life, I found myself questioning everything. Then, after reading some online comments, an unsettling thought crossed my mind. Could it be possible that my dad isn't my biological father? I didn't want to talk to Dad about my suspicions, not until I knew for sure. So, I decided to get a DNA test. It felt wrong to even think about it, but I had to know the truth. When I told Dad about the test, I played it cool, saying it was for checking potential genetic conditions. He didn't ask too many questions, and I begged him not to mention it to Mom. I didn't want to tip her off. In the meantime, Jessica kept bombarding me with texts and voicemails. She admitted that Mark's attention had made her feel desired, even sexy, in a way she hadn't felt in years. She claimed she hadn't been able to resist the temptation. But I was done. I didn't care about her excuses anymore. I met with a lawyer to start the divorce process. Since Jessica cheated, I wouldn't owe her alimony, and I planned to have her move out of the house as soon as possible. Then came the day of the DNA test results. I opened the email with trembling hands, my heart racing. And just like that, my entire world fell apart. The results were clear: I wasn't biologically related to my dad. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I couldn't stop crying as I drove straight to my parents' house, the printed results clutched in my hand. When Dad read them, his eyes widened in shock. Mom went pale. I confronted her, and at first, she tried to deny it. But under the weight of my anger and Dad's heartbreak, she finally broke down. Through tears, she confessed to having an affair 35 years ago. She got pregnant with me but hoped I might be Dad's child since she had also been intimate with him around the same time. When I was born with brown hair, so different from both my parents' blonde, she suspected the truth but chose to keep it buried. Dad was devastated. I could see the pain in his eyes as he realized the life he thought he'd built with Mom was built on a lie. We exchanged harsh words, and there were plenty of tears. Eventually, Dad and I left the house together. We ended up back at my hotel room, where he sat quietly, looking completely numb. I can't begin to describe the sympathy I feel for him. In some ways, I understand exactly what he's going through. Both of us were betrayed by the women we trusted most. It's been a month since that day. A lot has happened since. First off, I want to say that Dad hasn't abandoned me. Despite everything, he told me I'll always be his son, and that means the world to me. But his relationship with Mom is over. He's asked her to leave the house, and after some back and forth, she finally moved in with her sister. I haven't spoken to her since. I can't bring myself to face her. As for Jessica, the divorce papers have been served, and I've asked her to leave my house. She didn't take it well. She even showed up at my office, begging for another chance. I made a scene, yelling at her in front of everyone, and warned her to stay away or I'd get a restraining order. She's finally moving out, and I couldn't be happier to see her gone. I've taken the video of her and marked down from Facebook for now, but I've saved it as evidence for the divorce. There's no way that Snake is getting anything from me. Right now, Dad and I are both broken in different ways, but we're finding strength in each other. We're determined to rebuild our lives, free from the lies and betrayal that nearly destroyed us. It's not going to be easy, but we'll get there. One step at a time. Bye-bye.